Hi, I'm Adrian Strittmatter. Welcome to Bricks and More. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SAENTYS, a global creative consultancy specializing in destinations, real estate, and the hospitality sector. Bricks and More is all about exploring how to generate, unlock, and maximize real estate value. Our mission is to challenge outdated and limiting notions of how this is done. In each episode, we talk to top professionals to uncover innovative strategies that drive short, medium, and long-term gains. So if you're passionate about making real estate more valuable for more people, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bricks and More. Today, we're zooming in on one of the biggest opportunities and challenges in real estate. I'm talking about later living. Demographic shifts, social expectations, and health needs are creating unprecedented demand for high-quality senior living. Yet the UK market still lags behind international peers in both scale and innovation. So how do you create places that don't just provide care, but deliver lifestyle, wellness, and long-term value for both residents and stakeholders? And how can this asset class truly unlock returns for investors while genuinely transforming lives? As such, I am thrilled to welcome Henry Lumby, Chief Commercial Officer at Auriens. A later living, care, and real estate specialist, Henry has led groundbreaking projects across the sector, from co-founding Allegra Care and driving Amilcala's development strategy to heading retirement living at Savills. At Auriens, he's helping redefine what later living can be, blending hospitality, healthcare, and community into one of the UK's most ambitious and high-profile models. Henry brings a rare mix of advisory, operational, and development expertise to the conversation, and a clear vision for how later living can unlock long-term value for both investors and, more importantly, residents. So let's dive straight in. Henry, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll start off with a couple of sort of personal questions. Don't worry, not too personal. Your sort of career has spanned different organizations, from sort of Allegra Care, Savills, Amilcala. What would you say has been the sort of guiding force behind that journey?
I think I've had a real passion for making change. Really early in my career, so back in sort of 2001 when I started out, I was involved as a real estate broker down in Bournemouth on the south coast, the sort of retirement capital of the UK back then, the Blue Rinse Brigade, as it was known as. And we were handling part exchange properties as part of our sort of general sales effort of Bovis and McCarthy and Stone, and both at the time were doing retirement housing. And we were selling apartments, and one particular apartment in Bournemouth where a gentleman had lived. He'd moved in part exchange, and it was just in a terrible state. And it started to trigger a sort of intrigue as to why was this person living in such bad conditions? Why hadn't they moved earlier? Roll forward a couple of years, I joined Savills for my first stint. And one of the communities that we were selling, I was working in new homes, was a retirement community which had been built in Dorchester. The bizarre thing about this particular retirement community is it's the maternity hospital that I was born in. Yeah.
Beginning and end.
Exactly. So slightly surreal. And it was also became the eye hospital where my grandfather had one of his eyes taken out. Really bizarre sort of personal connection with this. But I remember being in this community and selling it, and the communal doors were what you'd have in a sort of like a school where they had the fire doors with the wire and the glass. Really, cheap and nasty. And I thought, God, isn't there something better that can be done here? And people were buying it because it was the only option they had within the local community. But it wasn't aspirational. It wasn't really serving a need other than being an age-restricted community. And then in 2010, I joined a retirement developer and also care operator down on the south coast. And we delivered our first later living community adjacent to a care home that we'd sold the land for. And it was fascinating. We sold the scheme out really quickly. Everyone came from the local community, apart from one gentleman, Derek, who had moved from Worthing to be near his girlfriend, but they weren't going to live together. And what was fascinating with that was everyone, when you asked them, what do you think about these houses? And they said, We love them. I said, okay, tell me what you don't like. So we took our construction director, we took our architects, interior designers, and we sat with them and said, what don't you like? And we got really good insights from them about tap design. Our taps, for instance, where we had little plug sockets on the back. So you pull the little plug handle. And actually, for a gentleman who had arthritis, that wasn't suitable. The taps were beautiful, but they were spindly. We had desk lamps, or a number of people had desk lamps either side of their kitchen sinks. And they had lovely big windows in front. I said, why have you got that? There's a light above. And they said, well, you're young people. You stand straight when you do the dishes. And but actually, we're older, so we come slightly forward. So we create the cone around our heads. And so where we were positioning lights wasn't suitable for them. When we then did our next scheme, we took the lessons that we'd learned and applied those to the next scheme, and it helped us with the sales success of that scheme. And so that's actually then gone on. And actually, a lot of the learnings that we've put into Auriens Chelsea have come from that. And so there was a drive to create change that you can deliver better and better product, but also there was such an undersupply of this product, and it was screaming out for more. So that sort of kept that theme through my career of later living and older people. And I guess I just love older people, which probably sits at the front, the front and center of why I'm in this sector.
Well, also the better work that you do now, the better the better later years you'll have as well.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah, I remember my grandmother being she was in a care home in West Dorset, and she was in a sort of basement room. And I remember basically Nora Batty from Last of Summer Wine-esque coming past with rolled tights, shuffling past her window. And my grandma had just given up on life. And I thought, actually, there's got to be something better to be here. You shouldn't be in a basement room at 91.
And I think that, we're going to go more into detail about a lot of the societal and transformational elements that are really, it's an existing market, but that is going to be fueled by those. But what would you say is for you the big sort of driving business and social impact story behind later living, and why you were drawn to that as well, about the sort of making it better and constant improvement?
So I think the as a sector, we have, because we have an aging population, we have a sector which has the opportunity to be larger than build to rent and student housing combined. Like most Western societies, we have an aging population, and that's absolutely key. But actually, the wider benefits of a later living solution and providing choice and somewhere where people actually want to go to and make the move provides huge benefits to the housing market. The over 65s have, circa 3 trillion of housing wealth. There are, over 1 million properties, 4 bedrooms or more, which are owned by the over 65s. The amount of empty bedrooms that sit in the country are absolutely incredible. So people are living in the wrong properties. And for generations, it's felt like we've had government policy which is focused on both investors in terms of buy-to-let investors, and also on the help to buy and starter homes, which are, starter homes particularly is obviously a very important area. But we've been building the wrong stock and not providing choice for people to right size, to move to age-appropriate housing, which will free up family housing to allow people to move up the ladder. And I think that is a huge driver. Also, when you look at the healthcare system, the amount of people who are bed blocking. So by that, I mean people who have a fall or some kind of medical instance and who have to go into hospital and aren't able to be discharged back until their home is being modified to be suitable for them. And that costs, hundreds of millions of pounds to the NHS every year. Often those people end up in care homes. And for many local authorities, the biggest and overwhelming percentage of their annual budgets is taken up with provision of adult social care. So paying for people to be in care homes. Those are people who, if they'd been in age-appropriate housing, would most likely not have ended up in those, needing to be in those care homes or needing to be in those hospitals. So you can see by making little changes, we can actually make a profound change to society for the better.
And so that's really interesting from, I think, so from the levers that you can control, the ones that are potentially more personal, and you referenced your grandmother, and I think both my grandmothers were the same when they had to leave their house or leave their apartment. It felt like the beginning of the end, in essence. So how do you overcome that in the sense of providing appropriate stock so they feel that there is a continuation? I mean, how do you help with that journey?
So I think it's quite interesting to talk about, as much as about the product, it's actually about the methodology of how you sell to people. So the methodology that we use is actually centered around how you deal with drug addicts. So it came out of a great guy in the US called David Smith, who built a CRM platform called Sherpa, having been a later living operator himself. And PCS, so person-centered selling, is about providing a solution to the problem and finding out what the underlying issue is. And an example that I often give is a lady in the US who told me at a conference. Lady in the US had been coming to a community for a number of years to look at, but wouldn't make the change. And eventually, the sales consultants built trust and got a trust breakthrough. And she said, "My 2 sons are adopted, but I don't know where their birth certificates are, and I don't want them to find out." So no amount of building the right product and the right sales, people would have got her to move. Alex, the particular sales consultant, went through her property and found in the loft the birth certificates. Her secret was kept safe. She moved to the community. So the journey is much longer and much more complex than
super personal. Then.
Super personal. And so we celebrate, and my sales team celebrate advances in terms of what are we discovering? What do we know about people? And often you're dealing with multi-generations of a family who are involved in decision making. We have a book called, which we brought up every copy we can find, called How to Talk to Seniors, which is we give to children where their parents are in denial. And actually it's like they need to make a change, but they're not able to. So a later living community is about providing a solution to a problem that they have. For many people, they are lonely, so they've lost their spouse. There's and it may be an impending loss for a spouse. There is often an underlying medical condition. It could be that the stairs have become too much of a barrier for them, an issue. And so that sort of event prompts the move. And they will often come in going, "This isn't for me, this isn't right for me, I'm too young." That sort of denial phase. And what makes them move to it is being part of a community. So being around other like-minded people, it's almost like going back to university. There's a very much a sort of collegiate, feel to it. By having people who are providing a great service to you, the relationship between the team who work on site with the residents is always absolutely key. You see that friendship, and you see that around the world, wherever I've been, beyond our own communities. And then having that peace of mind of care and support, so they can maintain their independence, but as their needs change, as they need support, that can be provided very discreetly within the home.
Within the home. And then, just because maybe some of our listeners won't be aware, and I'm pretty sure, I'm not going to say none of them are, but a big proportion won't be. What are the keys, so in terms of the market, the real difference between an integrated retirement sort of community and a care home? What are the big differences in terms of the different sub-products that sit within your sector, senior living?
I'm going to just add an additional curveball to that, if I may. Here in the UK, there's basically 3 types of them. Retirement housing, first of all. Retirement housing is basically a house builder delivering retirement communities. So over here, that would be McCarthy and Stone, Churchill Retirement, or Churchill Living as they're now called, which are effectively blocks of circa 40 apartments. They have a residence lounge. They have a manager who's there during the day, and they may, in some schemes, have a sort of small bistro and an exercise studio, but they are relatively small, predominantly 1 beds. And that was the sort of default model within the UK, really for sort of 40 years. And John McCarthy built a £1 billion business, and actually Churchill is his 2 sons, Spencer and Clinton. Or 2 of his sons. The integrated retirement communities, that concept came from Australia and New Zealand, and also the US, which was much broader scheme, so much higher number of units, so typically between 60 and 200 units, and providing a much greater range of facilities. So you'll have gyms, you'll have potentially spas, cinemas, activity rooms, restaurants, and they are very much an operational business. So you have a house builder who delivers it and moves on, very much like Barratt Homes. They may have a small operational sort of management of the service charge, whereas integrated retirement communities are very much operational real estate and akin to a hotel. But they are independent living. So they are providing people who are in their late 70s a solution to some underlying health condition or change of circumstance. Allowing them to then age in place. For a care home, those are for people typically who have more advanced care needs. So those are typically, late 80s, early 90s. There may be cognitive issues. So often dementia is one of the reasons that people will be within that.
Would you say that's the biggest reason that people would come to a care home?
No, because of this pace that dementia and Alzheimer's is growing in globally, it is becoming
It's
that.
becoming that,
But
yeah.
if I take back to my days with Allegra Care that I co-founded, we would have typically a 3-story care home, which would be between 60 and 80 beds. You'd have ground floor, which is residential care, so that's very low care needs. That's where people just need some support towards the end of life. Then you'd have nursing care, and then you'd have dementia. Dementia being the sort of secure floor, and you're looking at palliative and end of life care. But those are the 3 buckets, if you'd like. But what you find is there's a lot of misconception within the UK that the integrated retirement communities are growing fast, growing from not-for-profits, people like Extra Care Charitable Trust, Housing 21, Anchor, who've really been the innovators in terms of scale, tenure mix, providing care within those. And then you've seen this sort of UK morphing towards more the Australian model, which is the lifestyle villages. But now as customers are changing, there's more care being provided within those. And actually customers want that pathway of care.
That pathway, exactly. Why would you say, out of interest, those 3 markets that you reference have so much in terms of advance versus the UK or potentially other European countries as well?
So New Zealand, first of all, which we often look at as sort of the shining light, certainly for the last few years for the UK. So they have a Retirement Villages Act, and that really has put in place the parameters for the operators in which they can operate, the financial models that they can run, which is a deferred management fee. So they have a long-term interest in the properties. Also, not tying their leases that are granted to their residents to the Magna Carta, which is obviously the Landlord Tenant Act here goes back to. And also then in the case of Australia, they don't have stamp duty for later living moves. So there's an incentive for people to downsize. In New Zealand, it's been very much about the care provision. So you move in and will independent living and will support you through as your care needs change. In Australia, it's the lifestyle villages. But actually what's happened is that as they've introduced the care provision, they've seen occupancy go up. And so you're almost 100% occupancy in villages with a care provision, slightly lower without that. Investors have got happy in those 2 countries with the deferred management fee model. You're starting to see you've seen amalgamation of groups into bigger companies, and those groups are now being sold out to long-term capital. And in the US, very much the model started in the 70s and has grown very rapidly. And you have a lot of mature communities which are now trading, and it's a rental model. So very much like multifamily, and you see a huge amount of investment every year, but the customer really sits at the heart of it, and they provide a fantastic solution. But again, it's the independent living, assisted living, which is what we would call a care home, and then memory care, so dementia care. The villages which have that are absolutely the ones which are the shining lights in the US and Canada.
And what would you say then in terms of the UK? So you've got, obviously there's a big element around the sort of legislation or legislator that's going to help push things forward. What would you say the key sort of challenges or barriers that are present currently in the UK for this last frontier or last untapped frontier to become a reality?
Yeah, it felt like we've got close to that frontier a few times, and then it's gone back.
It's gone back. Yeah.
So 2017, we had the Law Commission report looking into event fees, so the deferred management fee. And that was a kind of pivotal moment because that looked into the legacy of the McCarthy and Stone event fees, which were paid on, or resale fees as they were known as, which had quite a bad press, and quite understandably so because of how they've been set up. And again, that's very much old McCarthy and Stone. What they saw was that, as I said, was as long as it's declared and there's transparency with the consumer, then that's absolutely fine. At the time, the UK Integrated Retirement Community Operators trade body, ARCO, were putting in place their own consumer code. That was based on the New Zealand Retirement Villages Act that I mentioned earlier. And that adoption by the operators of this consumer code. And I saw this in a turnaround project I was involved with for Helical on Renaissance Villages.
Yeah.
It was fascinating because with the deferred management fee, when we arrived on the project, the sales team didn't understand it. When we suddenly put effectively a mortgage key fax in front of them, they understood what we were saying, and actually that the deferred management fee had a benefit to the customer as well as the investor. And at that point in 2017, we saw AXA come in and buy Retirement Villages Group. We saw Legal & General come in and buy Inspired Villages and then Renaissance Villages, who I just mentioned. Goldman Sachs came in and set up Riverstone. And so you felt like momentum was really building. Octopus came in with Schroders and PIC into a couple of operators. And it felt like at that point we were getting to the frontier and momentum was really going to build. But and the output of the Law Commission was that was going to move through to primary legislation. The government responded, said, yes, we get this is good. But then nothing happened. And over the years, you've had investors looking at the deferred management fee going, well, look, we get it, but actually, where's the proof of it selling?
Of it working.
And so investors have looked very much at their returns from the development side rather than from the long-term income side. Whereas in Australia and New Zealand, they're very much just looking at the long-term investment value.
No, because everything's in place as well.
Everything's in place. So the sector has been, and also it's been hit by everything being bespoke. So if you look at kind of McCarthy and Stone, one of the things that I really admire about John McCarthy and Bill Stone, who are the guys who founded it, was they were builders by trade, and they understood the supply chain and they understood how to absolutely get their efficiencies. So they knew that how they could really create a scalable business, and having those sort of formulaic floor plates they were able to roll out and have very tight control over materials meant that they could really get scale. In the UK here, we need to see a later living operator actually almost becoming a house builder first to then become the operator. In New Zealand, some of the biggest companies on the New Zealand Stock Exchange are retirement village operators, people like Ryman. They started out as house builders. So you can see that actually house builders morphing into operators actually is a very interesting, opportunity.
And in terms of going back to the investors or the people who are coming into the market, what would you say are the key or the strongest value drivers that they would look at and go, okay, so obviously you've got the big sort of social demographic shift going. It makes complete sense. The numbers are in our favor. This is only going one way. But what would you say the other the strong value levers would be?
I think they're really driven by reputational risk. They don't want to be seen to be, in many cases, providing care. So if I go back to the likes of when Legal & General were coming into, and AXA were coming into the sector, it was like we don't want to have any association with care. We almost want to be lifestyle villages. Whereas I think now there is a much greater recognition of wanting to do the whole cycle. So actually,
why is that, do you think, in terms of why does care have a bad rep? It's counterintuitive in a way.
It is. I think there've been, there's when care goes wrong, it becomes very newsworthy.
Okay.
And I think that's where the issue is. But actually, there are so many absolutely fantastic caregivers as people, but also care organizations across the UK and globally who provide absolutely fantastic care and support. I only had to see it from my own business, Allegra, during the COVID times, how people went above and beyond. People stayed living in those care homes during the pandemic when people were locked in. The length people were giving their phones, to residents so they could speak to family when they couldn't see family for so long because of lockdown. So I think people have started to look at the care sector differently and look at later living differently, that actually it's more of a solution to the problem.
But I can definitely see because the minute there is one incident, it is headline news, and the reputational risk from from an image perspective can be.
And that's why regulation is so important. So the regulation of the sector, both in terms of the provision of care, so the Care Quality Commission, but also who should regulate personal care, but also in terms of the integrated retirement community operators, ARCO, and the Consumer Code. I'm the Code Compliance Officer at Auriens. We have to go through a very, very extensive audit. That's looking at all our marketing materials. That's looking at our complaint logs. That's looking at each year we have to have an independent resident satisfaction survey. We have to look at all of our websites, making sure we're not, as an industry, selling anything underhand. We have to have the highest standards, and that's what investors want because they really care about their reputation and they really want to see long-term value growth. And for the sector, it's about how do we create long-term value from this sector, make it, because it is defensible. The demographics are there. But we need to raise greater awareness of the product and of the benefits.
And in terms of Auriens, so we'll sort of go straight into the sort of, the development of the brand, of the product. It is referred to as the gold standard of later living, which is
Yep.
is a great standard, but also something, as you mentioned, that you had to live up. You
Yep.
have to constantly, day by day, live
Yep.
up to. Why or how is that sort of the case? Why is it referred to, in your view, as the gold standard?
It's a really interesting strapline for us to have, because it is something that we actually, it runs as a burning heart of the business. Is what we do, but also what our residents remind us of. That's what they expect. For the sector in the UK, it's largely grown outside London. So the provision of later living in London has been really limited. And so Auriens was the first scheme of its type to be delivered in effectively the super prime area. And our residents are quite rightly used to the best of the best. And so we had to set up a business and grow a service and a reputation that was based on hospitality, was based on lifestyle, community, and also the invisible hand of care. So that supports when you need it. I always say it's like having a crash in your car, and you want to know the airbag's going to go off. And our team are delivered from, I've been handpicked from the best hotels in London. Our chef is from the Savoy, our restaurant managers from Carlton Tower, our head concierge was from Grosvenor House Suites, and they are really, really fabulous people, and the whole team are, and they really care about our residents and about our welfare, and our residents almost refer to them as a second family. And it's about just going above and beyond. And when you see the interactions that happen every day between our residents, and just knowing how they like their coffee, being able to we can book you a table at the Colombier, but also our concierge can sort out your iPad when it's broken, and being able to really go above and beyond. That's what our residents expect, and having that company and that community. And actually, what's really interesting in my mind is that we could have delivered it at a less higher quality building, because that's not what is important to our residents. What is important to our residents is the community, it's the service, it's the lifestyle. I remember a resident coming back from her holiday, and she'd been on a cruise, and she came back in her limo to the front door, and I happened to be by concierge at the time, and the concierge go out, they pick her suitcases out of the car, and William, our general manager, comes out to greet her, sits her down, they have a coffee. The guys have taken her suitcases up to her apartment. Her driver comes in, has a quick chat, and then goes. And she's like, it's so good to be home. And that is the really nice thing. We can just sort out any problem. One of the great things that I love looking at is my office overlooks Dove House Green, so just overlooking the King's Road. And I often see our residents, our concierge, walking arm in arm with our residents, or carrying their bags of shopping back from Waitrose or M&S or Whole Foods. Even actually this week, Julie, our CEO, arrived to a meeting a few minutes later. We said, where have you been? And she said, I've just been walking Pauline to M&S. And it's just that level of a really interesting community, and it does have that collegiate feel that I mentioned earlier.
And in terms of who are there any? It's really interesting. Go sort of slightly off piece with regards to hospitality. Do you think there might be hotel operators who can see that sort of ability to provide that experience, especially now when we see, all the hotel brands all offering different things from lifestyle to accommodation?
Yep.
Do you see any of them, well, not necessarily naming any names, but do you see that as a possibility that someone would go, well, hang on a second, because the care element is, as you mentioned, a bit like the airbag, we can offer something here in a similar way to a sort of spin-off from branded residences? Yes. I don't know. It's a weird question, but yeah.
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. It wasn't in your notes.
No, it wasn't. I did it off piece.
Yeah,
Sorry.
No, that's fine. What I would say with that is a lot of the leading operators in the sector are people who have come from hotel backgrounds.
Gotcha.
And, I think within my own business, CEO, CFO, both were at Cubic together. Our GM is ex-hotelier. As I mentioned, most of the operations team are. So definitely there is a scope for hoteliers to come into the sector. But what's interesting, and I think where the sector is moving to, and I think probably the reason a lot of hoteliers have come in, is one, it's operational real estate. It's about understanding how you run a building well over the long term. But where I'm seeing the sector pivoting to is that the provision of care is much more important. So it is actually how you integrate that care, and by care I mean well-being. So when you move in, having a really good well-being, so supporting you with your sort of physical condition, making sure you're eating the right things. So when the resident moves into Auriens, they have a well-being assessment carried out by a well-being team, which is led by a gentleman called Gideon Remfrey, who's one of the top 25 trainers in the world. And so they'll take the bloods and they'll look at and do full survey of our residents and look at, where do we need to improve them? What, do they have particular issues with certain muscles? Are they deficient in certain terms of certain things? And how can we improve that? And it's almost like creating a blue zone, because we see and we track their results, and you see huge improvements. We actually just did it as with an ambassador of ours, Giles Brandreth, and actually, he was shocked at the benefits that it had to his health just over an eight week program. And actually, those techniques that Gideon and the team use are the same ones they use for elite athletes to break world records. So you have that one side, and everyone's looked at wellness, but actually, it's about the invisible hand of care. It's about how do you support me to age well and to age in place, and to support me as my needs change, or when I have the loss of a spouse or the impending loss of a spouse. And that's where you see the real magic. To answer to your question, yes, absolutely, I could see that happening.
But you need to know how
But
to.
you've got to go the next stage, because that's what the customers want. And as we see a community like Auriens, as it matures through fill up, and you see residents' needs changing, you can see that the care provision and the peace of mind of care is much, much more important. And indeed, globally, having been around the world and talked to residents and communities around the
That's
world,
what they're looking for.
those
Yeah.
that have that care and support provision are the ones which are I think are key.
What you're saying has opened up something really interesting, and maybe relates back to the scale question. But so we're talking, if I'm correct in assuming that you have two options, which is rental or purchase.
Yep.
Is there room for
At Auriens or in general?
at Auriens?
Yeah.
At Auriens. Sorry. Is there room for it's a strange question, but short-term lets, which would, someone comes in, they've just had something, you take care of them, they enjoy lifestyle, then go back home, then something else happens, they come. So what I'm trying to say is that in terms of the scalability, in terms of the flexibility of the offer, to become a part-time resident, exactly, respite, and then part-time, and then actually, well, you know what, I might, I'm really happy here, I should have moved earlier, blah, blah, blah.
So you're absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head of one of the options of how you fill a community. So we offer a service called Try Before You Buy. So that is where people can come in and can try the lifestyle, because they might be thinking, is this quite for me? So they may come to lots of events, they may come and meet lots of residents, they may come and meet lots of the team. However, they actually want to experience the lifestyle. So coming into the community and going, okay, this is interesting, this is for me, and actually living the life for a resident. But the point you're making, which is a stage further from that, and we see that as a good conversion tool, is there's an underlying medical issue or condition or crisis that's happened. It could be when they've had a knee or hip replaced. They've gone to the Claverdale, for instance, and then they've been there for a couple of weeks. Where do they go from there? Do they go back home? Do they have to go to a care home? Actually, could they come to somewhere like Auriens? And that start of their journey is very important. We've also seen people where there has been a crisis move in within 24 hours into one of our show apartments, and the team are able to react very quickly. But again, the theme that you're starting to pick up on is that the people who are moving here, something has happened. There is an underlying reason that is making them go, I need to make a change. Now, often those people will just stay in their existing home, and then that's when they end up becoming a burden to the NHS or ending up in a care home. What we're saying is actually there can be a solution within their local community, because remember, everyone is typically coming from within the local community. At Auriens, they're coming very much from a tight 2-mile radius of us.
In terms of branding and marketing, and obviously you would have done all the competitor analysis, how did you choose that positioning? How did you choose your sort of spot in the market? And then how did you communicate it to make sure that you had that gold standard as much in terms of positioning as actually product delivery and
So,
provision?
really interesting question. At the time, I wasn't at Auriens,
Hmm.
but I was previously a consultant when I was back at Savills for the second
Hmm.
time to Auriens. And the original founders of the business, David, Johnny, and Karen, their sort of thinking and sort of the genesis of it was that both Dave, Johnny, and Karen's parents had to have care at home, and it cost a huge amount of money.
Hmm.
And there was nothing catering for the absolute high end, market within London. And so they were looking at the time of being the one Hyde Park in terms of property, Harley Street in terms of medical care, and the Ritz in terms of hospitality. And they went off on that journey, opened the community, and then it was acquired by Oaktree. And at the time, there was a lot of misconceptions, and we were there sort of on the outside at the time,
Hmm.
looking at it, going, "Okay, how's this kind of going to work?" And it was very much focused. It felt from when we came in that it was focused on being high-end residential, and that the care and support was something that wasn't really talked about. It was almost shied away from. And I think that as we have looked to find our position within the market, we've looked to say, well, look, if Chelsea Barracks is at the other end of the King's Road, and that's really high-end residential, they've got great apartments, they've got great facilities.
Yeah.
So have
Why?
we. They've
Yeah.
got great, nice concierge. What's the point of difference? It's the hospitality, and it's the care and support,
Hmm.
and it's the community. So those are the drivers that we're going to focus on, and that's how we're going to build the brand. And so it's about subtly repositioning ourselves to be something that people can relate to, something they can understand. And within this sector, in the people don't go to Rightmove. They also don't go to estate agents typically to find this type of product.
Hmm.
They're often not aware of the product. So the main sort of sources of leads
Hmm.
are direct marketing.
Hmm.
The problem, and I was with one of our partners who's in her 80s, and I was at her house in Belgravia, and she said, "Look at all this." And there was a stack of direct marketing pieces from all of the operators in Greater London, and she said, "I'm being carpet bombed," and I don't blame her. And it was like, actually, how do you set yourself apart from that? So you have to elevate. So going back to your gold standard, we have to be above that. We have to be able to say, we are unashamedly more expensive than the competition, but that has to actually offer value. And when you look at everything that we provide, there is actually significant value there. And that's something that our residents, whether they be on a rental basis or whether they be on a purchase basis, very much buy into. But I think the key thing is you know working your local community to understand who you are. Our community engagement teams, our partnerships team, are out in the community because word of mouth is absolutely key. You want the lawyer, you want the wealth manager, you want the person at the local society, the person at the local bridge club to know about us and to know that we're good people and that we're a good place and that we're a solution and that we're providing a solution to the problem that their friend, their family, their associate may have, and that they should recommend that they come to see us.
Because you've also got a program of events
Yeah.
in-house, from concerts to talks.
Yeah.
That is also a really good way to show part of the community,
Yep.
to be able to invite people as opposed to asking them to purchase in a weird way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we very much invite the curious. We always say if we can get people to the front door, then half our job is done. We have a sort of club called Friends of Auriens, which is about people who are considering Auriens or who may be a little bit too young for Auriens, but one day in the future may consider it, for them to come and partake in events, to be part of our community, almost a community within a community, and partake in all of our events. So we have outward-facing events, and one specifically for the residents, but recitals are very, very well received. We have talks, fascinating talks. We've had Giles Brandreth in recently, Ingrid Seaward coming in talking about the royal family. We had actually a really lovely one, which was the love letters of Frederick Chopin, which was Lucy Parham and Patricia Hodge, and Alex Jennings, who was the last Prince Charles and the Crown randomly. And they came in, they did it in two places in London. They did Cadogan Hall, and the following night they did it at Oriens.
Oh, wow.
And
It's a good lineup.
yeah, and it was absolutely amazing. So you have those sort of events, al fresco dining in the summer, and which is great, live music and dinner. But also we have a range of activities for the residents. So our art classes are really, really popular, singing classes. On a Monday we have concierge and cake. So our residents come together with Dan, our head concierge, and they'll sit with them and with, Panos, our head chef, and Jamila in the restaurant manager, and they'll go through, what food did they like in the restaurant, what didn't they like, what the upcoming menus are, but also they'll choose the films they want to watch in the cinema, if there's a particular opera performance that they want to have live streamed, but also trips they want to do. In a couple of weeks, we've got a number of residents going off to Cornwall. Now, with the team, the reason they're going is 2 years ago they went with Dan, who's originally from Cornwall, for him to show them his Cornwall, and they loved it so much they want to go back again. We went to Dublin last year because one of our residents said his bucket list was to go and see Riverdance live in Dublin. So they did that. They had backstage, and it's those sorts of experiences that really make it special. Just as those can be also sound like very glamorous, but there's something as simple as a resident of ours used to always go for fish and chips in Belgravia, and so the team will take him off and his wife. They'll go off to that. They'll go past their old house in our Range Rover, and you just stop and pause and reflect on the memories. And it's those sorts of connections which are which create those memories and create those special times for them.
And I think which really then position you clearly at the top of the market. There's a lot of personal stories, a lot of, I would say, taking interest in the residents. A lot of people would say, well, that's great. You're really at the top of the market and you're, responding to the promise and in a really successful way. In terms of scalability of the industry, or even scalability, maybe if we start from there, scalability of Auriens, how do you see that working in terms of future sort of developments, prospects of Auriens as a brand across, different locations?
One thing I would say is that the rationale of why people age and the needs they have as they get older in terms of loneliness, in terms of a sense of place and purpose, a sense of being seen, a sense of peace of mind of knowing that there's someone there to look after them. That is the same whatever price point you're at and wherever you are globally. The Auriens platform backed by Oaktree, it was set up originally by the original founders to really focus on super prime. For us, that is a really good market. It's a market that's never been supplied, but it's not a market that you create scale in. And so for us, we have our second community that will be coming forward through into construction in due course, which is an Amicala site. So when we were also bought by Oaktree and created a blended family, but actually moving down that wealth pyramid is, I think, what the place to go, the way to go. I think that the concentration of this product has been in the southeast of the UK. There's a huge amount of this product in Surrey. We've got one in Weybridge, but actually this is needed across the country. And if you can solve issues around cost of construction, planning issues can be delivered, because is it C2, same as a care home, or is it C3? And that sort of lack of understanding of how long it takes to build, but also around customer understanding of the product, so you can fill the schemes up quicker. Means that, for us, we need to create a scalable platform, but also that scalable platform needs to have that invisible hand of care and support and that pathway of care sitting within that. So I think we're going to see the sector going from luxury, and there's been an arms race in which Auriens is unashamedly the absolute pinnacle of it, that arms race to deliver the most luxurious later living communities. But actually, I think those are they have a place, but actually what people want is that care and support and that peace of mind. And so I think there'll be innovation in terms of the scale of schemes, tenure types, so probably more hybrid communities offering both rental and for sale, but also how the resident amenity, rather than being blocks of different components, actually integrates. And it, rather than it being a room that is named, let's say, the cinema, it's actually everything is multi-purpose. It's actually at different times of the day. How does a room flex? Which means you can be much more efficient, because one of the problems that the sector has had is that the net to gross has been very poor in comparison to residential and in comparison to build to rent. And if you go and look at some of these build to rent schemes, the way their spaces are multi-use just works so well. And I think also that the what you're doing to create an intergenerational community and being in the heart of urban areas, because of funding, etc. It's traditionally been outside in rural areas.
Do you think there's a place, though, just keeping with this idea of expansion of Auriens, a place for there to be Auriens New York, Auriens Dubai,
Yep.
Auriens Hong Kong,
Yep.
and being basically if there's one per global city,
Yep.
that becomes the standard
Yeah.
from which
Yeah.
other people learn or aspire to.
Definitely,
Mhm.
definitely. I think that the scope, and we do get a few approaches which are always very interesting to go to other territories. I absolutely think that there is the place for Auriens within some of the great sort of global cities, and that is probably the area where we could go in almost as the hotel style operator that you talked about, the branded residence, as you talked about earlier. Working with a local partner to deliver it, and we would then come in and be the long term operator. And I think Auriens as a brand always has to have and occupy that space as being the gold standard of later living, whether it be in Chelsea or whether it be globally. And then you create a second sort of brand or tertiary brand, which then provides the the 4-star and the 3-star model, but within the group, which has the scale of the number of units and communities that sit across that. And you see that very much in America, where you'll have different brands for either different geographies or different price points, but all under the same ownership structure.
And we were talking about this before, and you're very, very passionate about how later living can obviously provide a service for its residents or let's say its target audience, but it can also solve a lot of other or annex or collateral challenges that are facing, let's say, the housing market at the moment. Could you talk about that a little bit, about how you really feel that the sector can help open up some of the problems we have?
So just sort of stepping back, one of the key problems that the sector has is a lack of understanding of what it is, but also a lack of understanding of the benefits. To give you an example, we were involved as Amicala with a site in Bristol. And when you talked about later living, Bristol City Council were like, don't understand what that is. Whereas if you said extra care, they're like, oh yeah, we understand that would be C2. Just from a choice of words. And so integrated retirement communities was like talking a different language, to them. Because there is, with it being typically C2 and having a care provision that sits within it, that doesn't count towards housing targets for local authorities. Also, because typically C2 doesn't attract affordable housing, it also is politically not attractive to them to deliver it. So you feel like you're on a sort of the back foot. When these communities are built and open, they go, this is great, we need more of this. So what we really need is clear guidance from central government, which says these are the benefits in terms of it frees up family housing that is underoccupied by older people. I think about where I live in Hampshire. My road is full predominantly of older people who are living in 4 and 5 bedroom houses in their 70s and 80s. And they just don't have a solution. They don't have a choice of where to go.
There's no choice.
There's no incentive for them to go.
No choice or incentive.
Whereas if they had an incentive to right size, to age appropriate housing, that would mean that those houses which they live in currently could be recycled to families who are looking to move up, who are over occupying smaller houses. They might be living in flats. And I go back to my second time at Savills, where before I set up the retirement living business, I was in the London Resi development team doing new homes. And I remember my first client was Greenland, who was Chinese state-owned business, and we had Ram Brewery down in Wandsworth. And I remember being out in Singapore at the exhibition, where we'd flown in to sell these flats to, the classic
road shows,
the road shows,
yeah.
with an amazing model which had the River Wandle looking the most blue you've ever seen it, and having Lego street lamps. It was really quite surreal. But this scheme had been delivered, also designed by Delancey and Minerva, and to get the planning permission, they delivered planned a lot of family apartments, so large family apartments within the buildings. And we were selling those not to families, we're selling them to investors. Those investors were buying it to rent them out or to make a capital gain on it. But then you're sat there going, so the product was designed to families, isn't actually being sold to families. Then you've got the basis of, in Wandsworth, there's all these Victorian, terraces that are older people are under-occupying them. And you're like, so why aren't we building a block here of later living apartments and a community that's age appropriate, that supports people to age in place and to maintain their independence?
That's freeing up the stock.
And free up the stock. And so this family apartment could actually be 2 later living apartments, and that would free up 2 local houses. and actually wouldn't have this thing of investors buying up the stock. Those people, because they would be living in this age appropriate community, would have less chance of ending up in a care home. They would, if they spend less
Or
days
hospital.
yeah, exactly. The number of visits to hospital, the number of days that they would spend in hospital, the visits to doctors, the various other issues like that would be reduced. Something very clearly referenced by Aston University's research with Exchequer Charitable Trust in looking into their residents on 2 or 3 different occasions. And so you're sat there going, there's a societal change that can happen here. And we need to focus on these people who are soon to be the largest cohort.
The largest demographic.
We're soon going to have more people retired than we are working. So let's provide a solution to those people. Let's help not only the housing market, let's also help the social care sector. Let's help local authorities. Let's help the NHS. And also, it's a really good thing from an ESG perspective. We're delivering huge, really important social value. And I think that is all of those linked together, but the message is somehow lost between the different departments within successive governments. Partly it's because you have different housing ministers every 5 minutes. I arrived here this afternoon thinking that when I got up this morning that Angela Rayner was going to be the housing secretary. She's now gone just before we recorded this. But that's really the case. I remember talking to Lord Best, who chairs the APPG on older persons housing. And I remember him talking about housing ministers. He goes, it's so difficult because they just don't get it unless they can relate to it. So I remember talking about Brandon Lewis, who used to be a Conservative housing minister. And he said he suddenly got it when his parents suddenly were a bit old.
And that's the thing. When you're faced with the sector. He was gone.
It's a joined up approach to the benefits, and we need to have incentives. We have to have regulation for the sector. So like the Retirement Villages Act in New Zealand, we need to have a stamp duty exemption for people who are looking at an incentive, because as much as they are being forced out of their house with the stick, the reason they're actually going to move is the carrot. That's why you have to have something that's fabulous.
Well, it's the other end of the sort of first-time buyer schemes and everything.
Exactly,
like that.
Exactly. A first-time buyer is like, I just want to get on the housing ladder. For an older person, it's like, this is where I've raised my children. This is what you think about the example I was saying earlier about the lady in America. This is where I've my memories are. They feel guilt about leaving their family home, and so you've got to have that sort of coordinated, joined up approach that provides that solution and actually embrace it. And the problem is it falls within different parts of government. Having a lease which is tied to the Magna Carta, we need to have could be updated, but we need to move away. Obviously, talk about moving to common hold. We need to move to a sort of occupational rights agreement like they have in New Zealand, which should be a very clean contract with all the regulation that sits around it. It means you'll get a lot more investors coming into the sector, and you'll sell the units quicker, which is a big part of it.
With a big part of the value as well. To close off, one last question, which is based on something you said, which really resonated with me, which was a kind of quotation or one of the sentences that comes back often that you've heard, which is, I wish I'd moved sooner. Yeah. And that was from residents. Yeah. Do you think that statement could also be applied to the market, to investors, to local government, to central government as well? Wished I'd moved sooner into the sector.
Absolutely. It's something I've heard in 20 plus years in later living from countless residents who've moved in and their family members. And actually the fact that people haven't moved sooner in terms of government, in terms of local government, etc., is that the problem is just going to get bigger. So, the frontier might at times appear to us to be, quite far away, but actually it's still there and it's actually coming quite fast. And actually we need to have a focus on this. And, it's a really, really interesting sector. It's a sector where really there's a huge scope for evolution. You look at the mature markets and see how they've innovated. We're at that point where investors can do, it really sits at the heart of the ESG green agenda. But actually it's where we need to see strategic change within our thinking and providing a solution to the customers, because they're there and gradually they're becoming more and more aware, and that's going to turn into a tsunami of awareness, and it's going to be a fascinating journey.
Henry, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks for listening to Bricks and More. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a colleague or friend who would appreciate it. If you're not already, connect with me on LinkedIn, whether to say hello or discuss a destination, real estate, or hospitality project of your own. Finally, please rate the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, share the episode, connect with me on LinkedIn, and rate the podcast. I'm Adrian Strittmatter, and I'll be back soon with the next episode.